Hello, everyone. My name is John Stiles. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Acumatica's Power Tool, the Generic Inquiry, presented by Matthew Barrett. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Everyone's been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, throughout the webinar, you can submit questions you have in the Questions tab. And if you'd like to submit a question, just look at the GoToWebinar and we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. We're also recording this presentation. It will be distributed tomorrow for all attendees, as well as those who've registered but were not able to attend. Finally, we would appreciate your participation in our closing survey. With that said, we're thrilled that you've taken some time out of your busy day to be with us on this webinar. SWK is here to help you fulfill your vision of a smarter, easier way to run your business by providing you with tools, support, software, and industry knowledge wherever you need it. So whether you're here to explore new solutions or just here to learn, don't hesitate to ask any questions that you might have. And as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. Check us out and give us a follow on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube so you don't miss out. So enough from me. I'm going to hand things over to Matthew for the main event.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction there, John. And again, just like John said, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us during this session. We are going to be discussing creating and modifying the generic inquiry, and we have quite a bit to cover. So let's go ahead and begin. So one of the very first things here is requirements, and it's a must-have. So it's an absolute must in attempting to either modify or create a generic inquiry, and that's to have access features assigned to your user account that you're going to use. This is done by adding or selecting the checkbox here for the predefined customizer access role, which can be found on the user screen. And once you have that set up, you should be able to have full access to this feature. So when I'm beginning a new generic inquiry, I always make sure that I have a goal in mind. And the reason this is important is because setting a goal is what gives you the basis of what data or data tables that you're going to need to bring into your generic inquiry. And since this is the starting point of every newly created generic inquiry. And as you can see here on the slide, our goal today is to get the list of all the sales order lines from our system and then display a result for each and every record that we got. So now that we've established our goal of getting a sales order line level data into our inquiry, we can proceed to the next steps here, which is to identify exactly what data tables or DACs we need to reference on our inquiry. And DAC is just short for data access class, which is what Acumatica calls their managed SQL data tables. But with recent versions of Acumatica, we've actually gained a new feature such as the DAC schema browser, where we can go and view what the data table looks like, what fields are available inside of it, and also see other valuable information about those tables. And just so everybody is aware, I'm going to be using my local demo instance with demo data on Acumatica's version 2023 R1. So let's go ahead and move over to my demo instance and see how this feature can be leveraged to assist in generic inquiry creation. So here in Acumatica, I'm just going to go ahead and refresh here real quick before we begin. And we're starting on the sales order screen. You know, as we talked about, our goal here was to get our sales order line level data information into a generic inquiry. But in tandem, we're going to bring some of our header information up here from the top into the same inquiry. So we're going to need to join these tables together. And so let's take a look at what we were identifying with that customizer role. It opens up this feature up here. You can see the top right button here, customization. That button's there as soon as you turn on the customizer roles to your user account. But we're going to use one of the features here called inspect element. And when you click on that, it's going to let you hover over fields and look at what data table is housing that specific field when you click on it. So let's see how that works here. Just going to go to grab the status here from the header. And when opening that, so it opens up and explains here the data class or the table that we're going to be referencing here is SO order. And the field that I clicked on specifically was status. That's why it's telling me exactly what field that is. But you can see this is a hyperlink here, and that hyperlink is what's going to take us directly to the DAC schema browser. So let's go ahead and open that. I'm going to go back to the sales order real quick because we need to look at a second one here for the line level information as well. So let's go down and inspect element and come down to this line level details and just click on one of these fields. Inventory ID is good. So you can see here now the data class is showing SO line and the field I clicked on inventory ID. So let's go ahead and click on that. And then let's actually take a look at these. So this is the DAX schema browser and it's calling out that same table name, SO line. And something kind of important here is the namespace, where it's coming from. You'll see that later on when we start joining it in the inquiry. But the namespace here is px.objects.so. And so that's something we'll use. But what's important in here, the most important, is identifying the primary keys for these tables. And so these gold keys here are what call out the primary keys. And you can see in the line table, we have 3 keys, which is the line number, and order type. So those are our key fields that we can use to match other data tables to reference this field. And so let's go back and look at the SO order table. So SO order here is in the exact same namespace as SO line, but you can now go down to the primary keys and see here that order number and order type is also the primary key for this table. So with them having both primary key matches, we were able to bring those together in an inquiry with no issue. So let's go and take a look at that here. And you can get to starting a new generic inquiry. You can either search for it and pop it up, or you can actually navigate to the customization workspace and it's under profiles. So that would be in here under more items, customization, and generic inquiry. So in starting a new one, first things first is to give it a name. Let's call it sales order lines. And now adding tables is what it's asking for. So that we can manually add these tables or we can use the wizard. For this example, let's just go ahead and add them for right now. So SO line, and remember that px.objects.so was the namespace coming out of that DAC browser. So that's the exact table that we want to reference here. And when I bring that table in, I'll hit a new line and you'll see it automatically, because it's an Acumatica default table. It brings in the description and automatically gives it a name, the alias. You can adjust that alias if you wanted to. But the other table we need to bring in here is SO order. And again, that px.objects.so SO order. So that means we're exactly referencing the data tables that we wanted to here. So let's hit save. So now we've pulled those 2 data tables into this inquiry, which gives us the ability to save it. You have to have something populated before you can even save an inquiry. But then the next step is to do the relations for those 2 tables, to bring them together. So we're going to use, or I'm going to show you here the add related table wizard, which is going to bring those 2 tables together because they have a common relation. So let's do the add related table. Our parent table in this example is going to be the SO line, because we want a record in our generic inquiry for every sales order line that exists. So we're going to start with a parent table of SO line, and then the child table. You can sit here and select from different lists. We know we wanted SO order, so we're just going to start typing that in. It found a match here for SO order. And so now what you can see is in the grid, now that we've identified these parent and child table, is it's showing us how those tables can be linked together using different data fields. But as you saw in the DAX schema browser, we identified that both the tables had primary keys matching to order number and order type. So those are the 2 we want to use to bring together here. So right here, this third line or row is the one we want to address. And that's showing that it's going to link from the order type and order number on one table to the order type and order number on another table. So once you've identified what link you want to bring together here, you just hit selected related table. Once you have that highlighted, it's going to show you the query that it's going to write there. And then you come down to the bottom right corner and you press add. Okay, once that's added, it fills out this, which you could have filled out manually yourself if you wanted to, but the wizard just kind of helps you. If it has a obvious reference, it can be used. So what it did here is SO line with an inner join on SO order, and using order type equals order type and order number equals order number from both of those disparate tables. And so the joins are kind of essential here, and you have different choices. And that's something we're going to discuss here. So let's move back to our PowerPoint slide. So determining what join type to use when you're creating a data relation. Right here, what you're seeing is just some sample data from a blog that I found online that was explaining inner joins, or I'm sorry, join types. In the table on the left, we can treat this as our primary or our master table, and the table 2 here on the right is going to be our secondary table. And you can see here the products have similar matches here with kiwis and onions. But as you get lower on this table, you can see it says tomatoes, but this table over here has broccoli. So those are disparate information and they're not going to link up. But let's take a look at how that is going to look when you're using different joins. So an inner join here, in referencing this table here, what it's showing is what's not highlighted is not going to be matched if a key result cannot be found. But if a key result is found in both of these tables, you're going to have a result show up. So what we're seeing here is kiwis identified it in both tables. It found kiwis, and in both tables it found onions. So an inner join matched those two together and brought us their respective price and quantities down together into one result set. So that's what an inner join has the potential to drop off some data here. As you can see, tomatoes and broccoli were completely omitted. In a left join here, so all the records from the left table or the parent table will display regardless of a key field match being made in the right table. Well, with this join type, you can actually see that tomatoes are included in the results, but broccoli was completely omitted. However, tomatoes doesn't achieve a quantity because tomatoes doesn't have a quantity that was matched from the second table here on the right. So we were able to pull all the records from this table in with that join type. And then here on the right join, it's exactly the opposite of a left join. And instead, the table 2 becomes kind of your primary table, as where kiwis and onions and now broccoli is going to be included. But again, that price could not be pulled from the other table. Let me go back here. Could not be pulled from that other table because broccoli doesn't exist over here. Okay, so now a full join, which is one of the last joins where you would do record matching here in Acumatica. All the records from the right table, the child table, and the left table, the parent table, will display regardless of a key field match being made. So with this join type, you can actually see that the broccoli and tomatoes in the results, but there's unavailable data for the price and quantity fields from the respective field or tables. So kiwis was found, onions, broccoli, tomatoes. So everything's being included, and it's just not showing the data where it couldn't. Oops. And now that we have more of a clear understanding of the join types, let's go ahead and move back into Acumatica and begin working on other functions in inquiries. Okay, and we're actually going to go ahead and move to a generic inquiry that I've set up in advance here, so just to save some time. So let's refresh that and get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is I've already added a bunch of fields to the results. So that's the first thing. I do tables, relations, and then I immediately come to the results grid and start adding some fields here. And what you're seeing in under the object column here is the data table. If you remember, SO order and SO line were the two different tables that we brought together. And I've just pulled different data fields from each one. And for some of them, I use the caption column, and that allows me to overwrite Acumatica's default name. So this SO line sort order will be named line number when we preview it. And so that's something new also in Acumatica's more modern versions. The generic inquiry has this preview option in the top right corner. While you're editing the generic inquiry, you can actually preview your changes. So let me pop that open, and let's just look at these fields. Okay. So these are all the data fields. So this is what we've done now. We've achieved linking those two tables together. And what we're seeing is a record for every sales order line in our system. And you can see it starts with invoices, and this is invoice number 57. Lines 1 and 2 are being pulled in from that result. And we just have a bunch of information coming off of the header of the sales order as well as the line, like specifically the inventory ID, the quantities, some of the prices, the value. Okay. So now let's move on to how we can limit this list of information, how we can filter it down. You know, maybe there are certain circumstances or or somebody's going to use this inquiry where they wouldn't necessarily need to see completed or canceled orders. So if we go to the conditions tab here, and let's scroll this back over, you can see what I have here in the top two conditions is SO order status does not equal, and then I've used from schema and canceled. And so filling out these fields, this is just the data field that you want to use, the condition that you want to use on it. But from schema, when that's turned on, let me go ahead and toggle it off here so we can see, it blanks out the value 1, okay, and lets you type in whatever you want. But when you use from schema, you're going to get the drop-down selection to be able to choose exactly what field that status has as an option. So you can see we want completed and canceled. And we're going to activate those two lines. And what that's going to do is filter out the data where completed and canceled is showing here in the grid. So right now we have 121 records. I'm going to save it. This preview automatically reloads after you save it every time. So we went from 121 records to now 71 records, and now there will be absolutely no statuses where they equaled, canceled, and completed with this filter set. So now moving on to parameters, which in tandem with filters are conditions here. As you can see, I've got some reference right here. We'll come back to that. So with these parameters here, when you're setting up a parameter, which is a way for to assist in like record filtering when a user is coming in, if they want to see between a certain date range on this ship date, which is how I have this set up here. So you can see the first line says request date from. In this field, you have to use no spaces, no special characters. It's only letters and numbers that can go in here. So that's why you see it written that way. And this is because Acumatica is going to use this information in the background code when it's doing it to process these parameters. So, and I have a schema field referenced here. So let's turn that on before we start talking about these fields, and you can kind of see the parameters will appear up here at the top. And so first you're going to see the display name. So that's the name that the user visually sees on the other end, ship date from. And the schema field that I filled out was the request date. So that's how I'm telling Acumatica that this parameter needs to show me a date or a calendar field, right? So when I click that field, it's going to give me this calendar to do filtering and sorting on the parameter. Right, and so I've set the default value here, which is a function in Acumatica you can use for date and time, year start -1. And what that's going to do is grab my business date up here and set it back a year, but at the start of the year. So you can see that's why it shows January 1 of 22 here. So let's filter by one of these real quick so I can show you here that that parameters do not come into play and do not function. I'm going to turn on the warehouse one as well until conditions are assigned to them. So let's just grab this and throw it here to January 23 of 15, right? Which should have essentially cut off all of these records right here. They do not meet that qualification of the date and time. But they're still showing, and that's because of the conditions not being set. So let me save it. It'll add warehouse here, and then let's go add the conditions that'll drive those parameters for us. Okay, so you can see we got all three of the parameters. The dates are all set in there. Nothing's happening with those parameters if you use them right now, but that's what the conditions are here for in this line right here. So we're starting. Something to note here is the bracket. You can see I've started using the brackets. Every time you want to commingle ands and ors with your operator here, you're going to have brackets around your or statement so that the and statements are processed in tandem with the two lines being included in that or statement here. So we're saying the SO line request date, which is that ship date, that second date field here, is greater than or equal to the request date parameter. So I was able to select that parameter because I've added it to the parameters tab. So we'll set that. And it's saying is greater than or equal to that parameter value, or the parameter value is empty. And so that allows you to make it empty, and it'll open that parameter up, for infinity of your time of your data. So let's go ahead and activate these parameters here. They're identical for the dates, very similar for the warehouse, except for the warehouse, we're choosing the site ID is equal to the warehouse ID. And we'll turn that on as well. And then let's make it bigger here. So now as soon as we've added those conditions, it now knows how to address our parameters and utilize them. So if we, for instance, select the warehouse, let's do retail or something just to limit down these records down. Retail, select. And as soon as I select that, it's now going to grab only the records that qualify in my parameter here, retail. And same can be said for the date. If you want to clear a parameter, you can just delete it and leave the field, and it'll clear that parameter and reset it. So we're going to do January 15th again on the ship to date, and that'll really limit it down to just 14 records here. So now it's only isolating what's between these two dates with how we configured the conditions for those parameters. Okay. Now let's move to sorting this data. So let's go ahead and clear this parameter, and let's address sorting it. So right now it's just kind of in a default sort because we have not defined one. So when we go to the sort order, it's telling you this is the default sort order down here at the bottom. So that's how it's doing it right now. But we want to control it and change it. So you can see the first one I've added here. This is a prioritization sort. You can see that's why they have the up and down arrows to move these in different priority order. So we're going to actually just turn on order type here in descending. And what you'll see now is the order type will use descending calculation here on the alphabet and pull SO to be first. So let's just go ahead and save and show that. Okay, so SO is first now, but you can tell here that these are just in some sort of order counting up maybe from the order number here, but we're going to change it to a descending sort by turning that on. And you do have different choices in sort order. It's just ascending or descending here. But we're going to do descending on the order number. So what that's going to do is reverse this sequence so that the newest order or the highest order number is now going to be at the top, but it's still going to listen to my order type descending because I've made that the higher priority in the list. And then on the third sort here, we're going to do the SO line sort order, which is this one here, just to make sure that they stay in sequence of line 1 first, line 2, line 1, line 2, and vice versa, etc. Let's save. So now, exactly like I was describing here, we got SO and we have now a descending order number. And then the lines are, as you can tell, are going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So, there's not much more to sorting. That's kind of what it is. But let's go ahead and move to grouping now. Let's talk about grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and filter a value so it makes more sense here. So you can see here we have one line with a SO order type for order number 61, but we also have these 3 invoice lines with the same order number 61. So those should not be, combined together. But with grouping, that's exactly what you're doing is you're combining data on a specific data field. And you can see here the first one I have identified is SO order number. So that's this number right here. And all of those matching, when I activate this grouping and save it, it's going to collapse those into one single record in the results, which is obviously not appropriate for our inquiry because it's merging those 2 order types that are not the same. So let's go ahead and I'll demonstrate here. When you add a secondary portion of the sort like order type, it'll now take into account that those order types are different and split those out and show us 2 lines, which is the true method of grouping if we wanted to group on this inquiry. So now we've got our 2 lines here, and you can see the invoice line. So something kind of interesting, and we'll talk about that here in a moment on the aggregates, is you can see line number became 6 here even though we know that this was only 3 lines before. And that's because by default, Acumatica uses an aggregate function of sum. So it's actually adding 1 plus 2 plus 3 to give us 6. And that's why you still have 1 here. So in order to address that when you're using grouping, you come to the results grid, and let's go to right to that field here, line, and you use this aggregate function column on that row. And this is gonna, so right now it's doing a sum, even though it's not defined. That's just what Acumatica does by default without anything defined. But you can use a min, which would show the minimum value, a max, which would show the highest value, an average if you wanted to get an average. But we're going to use count so that it will count how many lines are actually being compressed in that group. So we'll save it, and once that updates, we should see that there's only 3 lines being indicated there. So we have our 3 lines now being shown, and that's just simply by changing that aggregate function to a count, so it's counting the records rather than summing them. But for our inquiry's sake, we don't need grouping because we want a record for every line that's available, so we can see that line level information. So I'm actually going to turn these back off. And before we move on to navigation and hyperlinks, let's just cover a few things in the results grid field here. So I've added a custom formula to the very last field. It's very simple. It's just and in order to get to formulas, by the way, it's this little pencil right here. It opens up the formula editor box. I've just grabbed these fields from the fields list here, and I simply did order total minus the tax total. So it's just subtracting the tax. So it's the order total with no tax. But when we take a look at that on the grid, you'll notice it's different from the rest of the numbers that got put here. And it looks the same as unit price, but that's just because unit price is matching the system's defined decimal precision. So obviously we wouldn't want to show an order total with 4 decimals, or maybe you do, but so you could leave it like that. But there is a way to make it match another field's schema format. And so we're going to assign the order total schema field to my formula field, where you'll see that those decimals will drop off at the end, and it'll just become the 2 decimals at the end. So let's see that here. Order total. Okay. And now that field is identically matching the format from this field. So it still held its value, the calculation still occurs. It's just now having a format that similarly replicates this field right here. And so let's also add total aggregate functions. That was something I probably should have talked about with grouping, but you don't need grouping in specific to do a total aggregate. So a total aggregate function is essentially going to take, it's used on numbers, and it's going to take the column. I guess you could use accounts as well, but it's going to take the column here, and in this instance, I'm going to tell it to sum the order total, or let's do the line totals here. So I'm going to do the line total and turn on a total aggregate and turn on a sum. And what that's going to turn on for us is at the very bottom of the inquiry, right below that column, is it's going to show us the calculation of adding all of those up together, what it equals. So we're going to come over here, and now you can see adding all those up, it gives us this value. I still have it filtered here, so that's why it's giving us this value, but that value will actually show for every record you have. So let me unfilter this and demonstrate that. So now we're back to having the 71 records in the grid. And when I go over to that sum, it's going to be much larger because it's actually adding up every value in the entire inquiry here that's displaying. Okay. All right, let's go move over to navigation and hyperlinks. So something first here, you can see this default navigation field, this column, is turned off here for order type. And if Acumatica has a default way to navigate to one of these fields, it will add, by leaving this default navigation checkbox checked, it will add this hyperlink. You can see it's hyperlinking me to sales order 69 in this example. So if I click that, it'll open sales order 69. but you can turn those off by unchecking that default navigation box if you wanted to. Okay, and then we're going to actually go to the navigation tab here. Let me move this over. I have some side panels already configured, but I wanted to talk first about an external navigation. So this is going to navigate and do a Google search for us based on the data that's in our grid. So you can see I've just copy pasted the Google search information in here. And the trick to making this populate fields over here in the navigation parameter is this where you see customer name in the double parentheses. So once you add the double parentheses, it'll become a selectable field over here for you to pick. And so that's where it's going to inject the parameter into the URL. And so I've specified customer name. You can type whatever you want there, but I'm grabbing the customer name based on this field, which is the customer ID description. And let's close that. And so I'm going to assign that to the customer ID's description field. And I'm going to turn on these side panels here real quick so we can see those later on. But they're configured in a similar fashion. You can as soon as you select a side panel and a screen in Acumatica, so you have to pick what screen you would like to display in that side panel. You got to fill out the fields over here that are selectable. So there's going to be 2 in this example, and it's order type and order number. And as you can see, I just pointed it to order type and order number fields so it knows what fields to use in the inquiry when displaying the information. And same for customer, it's just using the customer ID. But let's go assign this Google search to the field that I wanted to do. So when we go back to the results grid, we're going to assign it to that customer ID description, which was right here. So you go to the navigate to column, and you'll see that is a selection choice from my navigation because it was an active option. So we'll select that and hit save, and we'll preview. And when we preview now, the customer ID field before was not a hyperlink, but it will be a hyperlink here in just a moment. So you can see here now customer name is hyperlink, and as soon as I click that, it's going to do a Google search on exactly the text that you're reading right here. So it just searches based on whatever you click on. You can click on any of these different ones, and it's going to automatically do that. Something quickly you can drive. So you saw it was opening up a new tab. Well, that's because it was defined to open a new tab. So here is the new tab option, but I could have set it up to be the same tab, which means if I click on this, it would overwrite my current tab with the Google search. Or like I said, this one's doing a new tab, but you could have had the choice of a pop-up window as well. Just like all the default navigations in Acumatica, they always do a pop-up window when you click on them. Okay. Now, before we talk about side panels and pivot tables, we have to talk about saving and adding this generic inquiry to the menu so other people can see it, utilize it. And we're going to put it somewhere on here. By default, as soon as you check this, make visible on the UI, which is how you achieve this, it's going to give it the name copy. It's going to just copy it straight from the title to the name. And then it automatically assigns it a workspace and category of data views and inquiries. So we're just going to hit save, and it's going to assign it a screen ID. And that screen ID is what's important before we can start messing with this generic inquiry outside of this window. So now that I've saved it to data views and inquiries, you can see data views, inquiries, and it'll be all the way at the bottom, sales order lines. So, and actually, let's just go ahead and open that. And I guess first things first, let's look at the side panel. So the way the side panels work, if you remember right, I fed in the order type and the order number for the sales order side panel on the top right corner over here. So it's going to use, because I have this row highlighted, it's going to use that row's information and populate it into the side panel. So we should see sales order SO70. And you can click on the next record if you want, and now it's going to load the next one, sales order 69 here, 68, whatever. And then customer is working off of this customer ID. So if I click on customer, I'll get the customer profile, and it'll be for coffee shop. And so this is a way that you can come in here and make quick edits if you needed to while you're working through an inquiry. You know, if it made sense that you needed to have access to these screens while you're addressing this data. And you can have side panels to just about any screen in Acumatica, even reports. As long as you have the parameter fields in your inquiry to feed, you can populate them here on your side panel. Let's go ahead and set up just a quick filter here. I'm going to do an advanced filter. So that's what this little filter funnel is here, right here. And you can start creating a filter. And we're going to say the status equals open. So just an easy filter, but something we can save. So we want status for the property and equals, and then it lets you select a value here, open. And as soon as I hit apply, it'll apply that filter. But now I want to save that filter. So you'll see this little floppy disk became available right here for you. You can also save the filter in here. But if you hit this floppy disk, it's going to ask you to name it. So this is just open orders. And I can make it a shared configuration because I'm an administrator. And a shared configuration just means anybody that accesses this inquiry will also see this advanced filter that's already configured. So I'm going to save it, and you'll see now we have an all records view and to open orders. And this will always be here when we come back to this inquiry, and we can use it. You can even define it as your default. So every time you load this inquiry, it'll default to this open orders tab rather than the all records if it made sense for that. But now we're going to do a quick pivot table here off of all of this data. So we have the 71 records, you know, and we're going to do a quick pivot and take a look at what those look like. So that's actually under these three dots here, and you hit save as pivot, and it's going to automatically force us to name it. So we're just going to call it item summary. Make it shared again, why not? And now it's going to ask you to kind of fill it out. How do you want to fill out your pivot table? So we're just going to do a quick and dirty version. We want the inventory ID for the row. We're going to do warehouse for the columns so we can see them split out by warehouse. And then we want the line totals as the value. So simply just dragging those three things out here and then pressing the gear up here in the top right, that pivot table quickly loaded all of that data that was in the grid, and we can come back to it. So it grabs all of this data and is summarizing it together in a pivot. So it's finding all the items, for example, this juicer 15 in the equip house, we've sold 15 or $5,000 of it from the data that was in the grid. And all of these are hyperlinks. So if you want to see what makes up this value, you can actually click on it and it's going to show you all the records that it was pulling together to create that $2,474.50. And you can go right back to it and reference it. You can even make quick changes to it. So if you edit the pivot table, let's say I wanted to get a customer summary, you can throw the customer right ahead of the inventory ID. And we're just going to start by default with collapsed. And now we'll load this. So now quickly, I'm just getting a summary based on all my customers and what warehouse I'm shipping them. You know, you can see wholesale, retail, equip house. So it's a quick summary, but then you can also blow these out and look at what items that customer was buying, right? So that's the expansion of the pivot table here. Let's go ahead and take it back. Let's go to the inquiry. So now one of the last things here in the generic inquiry results grid that we want to talk about is the using quick search. So right now this inquiry, nothing is configured to be used in the quick search. And what the quick search is this inquiry search box right here at the top right corner. So right now nothing's configured. And if I search, for example, you see lemon being referenced in the everywhere. So if I type LEM, but it's not going to give me any results, right? If it found nothing, everything actually is what it found, because it doesn't have that being told to be included. So if we take the inventory ID field and check this box here for using quick search, and we'll just go ahead and grab the description too. Those two fields are now going to be utilized in the inquiry search box. You do have to refresh if you make changes on that window and come back to an inquiry. But now the inventory ID and the line description are going to be columns that are being searched. And the reason these are turned off by default is if you were to turn them on every single field, when you type the word, you know, LEM, It's going to search every single record and every single column across the entire inquiry. So, use that, uh, so, consciously when you're doing that, so you don't overload your system. Maybe you had 500,000 records in your inquiry. It's possible. So you have to really understand what you're searching for now. And now it's isolating all those records where it found my match. So we can take that out. Okay, let's go back to the inquiry. Yeah, we're going to kind of reference, actually, we want to go into the results grid now, and we'll discuss the end user functions here. So like I was showing with the side panels, you can use your arrow keys here to go up and down, left and right in the grid, and that will also feed, your side panels will adjust as you're moving the arrow key in the grid here, selecting new rows to highlight. Some quick filter. So if you wanted to quickly filter on some of these items, and rather than having to have these filters, maybe you only want to see open orders or shipping orders here in this example, you can right click on it and do filter by this cell value, or you could just simply press Shift F, and it's going to immediately throw a filter up here in the top right corner, and it's all now just being filtered by that. And you can even say by this date, right? It'll do multiple filters at the same time. And if you want to remove these quickly, you don't have to come up and remove them. You can actually just drag and drop them off, and the filters quickly are removed, and it brings the data right back to the results that you were having before. Okay. One of the last things I want to kind of go over here is the column configurator. And so right now, by default, it's just showing everything that I left visible on the generic inquiry. And so that was this, let me show that here, this visible checkbox. Everything is currently listed visible. So when you, by default, when you load it into this inquiry, every field came in. But let's say somebody came in and they don't want anything to do with these dollar numbers here. So we can easily remove that with this little cabinet. It looks like a file cabinet. It's called the column configurator. And now it's listing all of those fields that we have. And if you want to remove items, you move them off of the selected columns. If you wanted to add columns, you would move them back from the available. So we're going to just select the totals here, move them off the grid, and hit OK. Now we're just left with the quantities that are available. Right, and every time I come back to this screen, that column configuration will apply, and so everybody will, or so I will have access to that. It'll be the same every time I come back here. But there is also a way, if you have administrator rights assigned to your account, if you come up to the tools, you can share that column configuration with everybody in your organization. So it becomes the default for everyone that comes to that inquiry, and they can still override that and change it to whatever they wanted to. Okay, let's go ahead and move over to the recap here. So quickly going over this, we first talked about access roles and how customizer is needed. Then we moved on to the DAX and tables and looked at how we can pull data from those tables and how we can find what DAX the fields are in and what the fields are called. We discussed table joins and different types of joins used to achieve, different results based on your key field matches. We went over filtering conditions, limiting, which is what limits the records displayed in the results. You're filtering items out with those. You're telling it what you want to see exactly. Parameters, again, various options to assist with record filtering by a user. It just lets them select things quickly right at the top of a grid. If there's thousands of rows and data in the generic inquiry, it's going to take a long time for someone to try and go through that, rather than having a parameter where they can quickly just filter what they want. Sorting, defining the sort order so it runs in a flow or a sequence that makes sense for what you're working on. We went over grouping here where multiple records are grouped together into one row or one line based on the defined field that you had in the grouping selection. We talked about navigation and hyperlinks, and so that was navigating the default navigation and also hyperlinking out of Acumatica onto the web here. I went over a pivot table, just quickly threw together a summary of that data. Pivot tables are very powerful in the sense that you can grab this massive data set and summarize it real quick and understand, what your customers are buying from you, how many items, how much. So it's a very powerful feature that can be utilized in many different aspects. And then the side panels. So that was just getting quick access to specific Acumatica screens based on what row that you had currently highlighted. And so you could easily adjust records on the fly while you're working with them. And we'll go ahead and open it up to Q&A here. I'll pass it back to John.
Thanks, Matt. That was great. Yeah, as Matt said, we'll open up to Q&A now. I know we have a few already in there, but if anyone else has any questions, now's the time to add them into our question section, and we will get them answered for you in order in which we receive them. So I'll just give everybody a minute. Just a reminder, we do have a subject matter expert here, so it's a great opportunity to have any questions answered in real time. So I'll start off with what we have currently, Matt. And the first
Okay.
question is, can you assign specific security access roles to a custom generic inquiry?
Yeah, so the short answer to that is absolutely yes. Because you can pull whatever data from your system into a generic inquiry, and maybe you wouldn't want to display that for every user in your system. With the way I have set this up right now, as soon as you added this generic inquiry to the UI, it automatically give everybody in the system all access. But the way to change that, and the easiest way here, is to just go straight to the generic inquiry and then use the tools function as if you have an administrator rights. And you can immediately access the access rights screen right here. And you can assign what roles should have access to that current generic inquiry. So you can see it isolated the generic inquiry. And right now, everybody is not set. So that's why everyone has access to it. So quick answer to that is yes.
Awesome. So the next question is, can data be exported from the results of a generic inquiry? And if so, what kind of file can be produced?
Yeah, absolutely. So Excel is the only file that can be exported out of a generic inquiry here, and that's actually a function on every generic inquiry, whether it's custom or pre-built by Acumatica. And so the export button is up here, and whatever you have in your results grid at the time you press that button is what you're going to get. So even if you filter it down to a tighter set of records and then you hit export, it's going to only export those 3 records, and it'll give you an Excel file automatically downloaded in your browser.
Great. Got a couple more for you.
Sure.
And another one just came in too. So, uh, how do you figure out what is a parent versus child table?
So it kind of comes back to um, what data you're trying to achieve in your goal. So in this example, the parent table was kind of, I guess, obvious in the sense that we wanted to split out the line level information. And if I made the sales order header the parent table, I guess I could have done that as a parent, but if I did that, we wouldn't have had all these line detailed in records here. So in determining the parent table, you kind of have to see what your goal is to achieve and then pull that information based on that. So, I can't really say it's different for every applicable scenario. So I can't give a specific answer for that, but we are available for help if that ever comes up and you need some assistance determining that information.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Um, one more. How do I get a side panel?
How do you get so that's in under here under the navigation screen. So side panel is something that you just configure, and I'll walk through that here just quickly. So you hit plus sign here on the navigation targets, and that's going to automatically open up what screen in Acumatica you want to pick. So, let's say, for example, we want to look at the anything. Let's do the customer again, even though I've already shown that side panel here. So if we type customer, you're going to get tons of fields labeled customer, but what we're specifically looking for is the customer profile, which is under the category here. So I'm just going to filter that so we can get a quicker list here. So profile. And now you're seeing customers, profile, and this screen ID is what matches the side panel for the screen in Acumatica. So as you can see, it's AR303000. And so if you wanted to actually find out what screen you wanted, you can actually go grab that here. I think that was under receivables. Yeah, receivables, customers. And let's open that. So that screen ID should match here, this AR303000. And then you just toggle window mode to side panel, right? And as soon as you do that, you come over here to the navigation parameters. You're going to wait a second because it does actually update that information. So it's going to ask you now to give it, you can give it an icon, so a picture, right? It'll be the little picture that you see up in the top right grid. And you can title that side panel to whatever you wanted to. You could call it customer profile if you wanted to. And then the configuration for it is the navigation parameters. You hit the plus sign and it's going to ask you to fill out what is the account CD that I can use to get to that customer profile. And so that's the customer ID in this example. So now when we refresh the inquiry, we'll have a new side panel. Oops. Now we have customer profile here. Oh, I grabbed it from the sales order line. So that is something you do need to be aware of. I should have grabbed it from the SO header customer ID field. And that's because the sales order line doesn't have that default navigation method. Okay, so that's adding a side panel and you can add it to any generic inquiry. Any more
Awesome, thanks, Matt.
questions, John?
Yeah, I got two more for you.
Sure.
What's the difference between aggregate function and total aggregate function?
So the aggregate functions are what worked in tandem with, let me turn on my fields here. That's what worked in tandem with grouping is the aggregate function. And the total aggregate function is what works as a total in the grid. So let's turn these fields back on so we can see that. So a total aggregate function is what added this calculation to the bottom. So a total aggregate function is that column specifically and adding all of that up, as where the aggregate function itself in the results grid was where we did that count. When we did the grouping, we changed it from doing a sum on that line number to a count. So an aggregate function affects a specific field in the results grid, as where the total aggregate function is doing an entire column of information. Okay.
Okay, and I'm gonna read this verbatim. I'm not sure if it relates to this answer that you just gave, but
Okay.
capability of running total on each line. I guess is there a
Uh,
capability of running total on each line? And
I
it's
don't
asked by the
think
same
so. I don't.
person, so okay.
Yeah, I mean, running total, I guess that would be like adding this up becomes the next line. I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to define there, but getting a total function should give you essentially the full total of what you're seeing in here rather than a total that's accumulating in the grid.
Okay. Well, for anyone, if we didn't answer your question exactly for the way you're looking for it, feel free to reach out to us after the webinar. We're happy to field any additional questions that may come up. But that does it for all the questions that I currently have in the queue here, Matt.
Alrighty. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today.